Boulder County is a very special place with abundant natural beauty and biodiversity. This year, Boulder County Parks and Open Space is celebrating its 35th anniversary. We are grateful to those who initiated this effort to preserve and protect important lands, and to the many who have supported our program over the years. In looking back, Boulder County's citizens were interested in preserving open space before the county even had a Parks and Open Space Department. In 1967, 8 years before the creation of our department, the Board of County Commissioners appointed a Parks and Open Space Advisory Committee to work on open space issues in the county. They were appointed because residents wanted their local government to make sure that the things that make this place special were protected. And public involvement has remained strong throughout our 35-year history. So when we use the word "we" in the rest of this presentation, we're talking about the collective effort of residents, staff, and elected officials that made this all possible. Open space preserves wildlife habitat, provides low-intensity passive recreation, protects farming and ranching, preserves historic buildings and landscapes, and perhaps most fundamentally, maintains rural lands between our growing communities. Today, our program is one of the most successful open space programs in the country, and our department includes not only the staff who work on open space protection, but also the Boulder County Fairgrounds, the Boulder County Youth Corps, and the local office of the CSU Extension. Boulder County started preserving land in the 1970s. Large mountain ranches were purchased beginning in 1976, including the 775-acre Betasso Preserve west of Boulder and the 2,566-acre Walker Ranch on Flagstaff Road. The first purchase on the plains occurred in 1979 with Rock Creek Farm between Lafayette, Louisville, and Broomfield. Since then, the county has preserved about 1,000 properties that range in size from less than 1 acre to the 4,923-acre Heil Valley Ranch. To understand the size of an acre, think about the size of a football field. That's 1 acre. When we add up the numbers, the open space program has preserved approximately 94,000 acres of land, owning 59,000 acres outright and another 35,000 acres that are protected from development by conservation easement. Slightly less than half of the preserved land is located in the foothills and mountains, and slightly more than 1/2 is on the plains. So what's so special about Boulder County anyway, that makes stewardship such a priority? Situated at the intersection of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains, Boulder County's elevation gains 9,000 vertical feet from the foothills to our highest peaks. The distance between the foothills and the Continental Divide is as short as 18 miles, far shorter than anywhere else along the Front Range. In fact, the easternmost point of the Continental Divide is in Boulder County. What that produces is an abundance of different ecosystems and enormous habitat diversity within a small area. That diversity allows us to preserve land that is home to a vast array of wildlife, from bald eagles to threatened minnow species in our streams, from moose in the high country to coyotes on the plains, from rare butterflies to bluebirds, and on and on. 2 years ago, we hired the Colorado Natural Heritage Program field scientists to complete a biodiversity study of the entire county. They found an enormous amount of species diversity, including landscape-level plant associations that are rare and critically threatened on a global scale. This map shows important biodiversity areas in Boulder County. The darker the color, the more significant and rare are the plant communities. There are 62 distinct areas that are significant. And here's that same map showing the land within each of those areas of significant biodiversity that is protected either as our open space, as open space in a city program, or as federal land. The land that shows in purple is the land that is not permanently protected. Of note, about 83% of the significant land has been protected. In addition to the natural habitat that occurs in Boulder County, our stewardship ethic means doing our best to maintain and improve the environmental condition of the land that we have purchased. We're restoring native prairie grasslands on land that was very marginal agricultural land. We're enhancing riparian corridors and creating and enhancing wetlands. And we're working to create healthier forests that are less susceptible to wildfire and disease, and making them more diverse for wildlife habitat. These projects require commitment and patience. For example, establishing a prairie grassland in an arid environment like ours is tricky. Will we get enough rain to get the grasses, forbs, and shrubs started? How do we control the weed species that thrive after land has been disturbed and planted? How do we get a mix of vegetation so that there is diverse habitat? And do we have the patience to wait a decade for grasslands to fill in and survive? Despite the unknowns, we've accomplished a lot in the last decade. We've planted almost 1,500 acres in grasses in 2 large areas: the hillsides above Rock Creek in the southeast part of the county, and the flatland on the west side of Rabbit Mountain near Lyons. 500 acres are well on their way to becoming a grassland, and another 1,000 acres are in the process of conversion. Along Rock Creek, south of Louisville, we've restored the riparian area and have established wetlands. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to reestablish a floodplain and create riparian vegetation along Boulder Creek in eastern Boulder County. We worked with boulder flycasters to create a more natural stream segment on Boulder Creek, east of Nederland. Using a workforce of volunteers and youth corps, we are restoring a mile section of stream along the south branch of the St. Vrain near Hygiene, planting over 2,000 shrubs and installing cattle crossings to minimize stream bank erosion. We're enhancing wildlife habitat at Kenosha Ponds near Erie after the area was mined for gravel. We've planted almost 9,500 wetland plants on 3.5 acres of newly created wetland. We've created wetlands on Rock Creek Farm and at the Ricky Weiser wetland at Walden Ponds. Additionally, we've done a lot of work in revegetating social trails on various properties. We've also worked to establish healthy forests. Our forests are far more dense than they were historically. While periodic wildfires would have thinned the forest in earlier times, there has been so much human settlement in the last century and a half that fires have been suppressed and more trees have grown. We now work to thin the forest so that a healthy ecosystem returns. The beetle infestation of recent years has made our work in this area all the more important. We've done forestry work at Walker Ranch west of Boulder, Heil Valley Ranch and Hall Ranch near Lyons, Mud Lake and Reynolds Ranch near Nederland, and smaller properties such as Bald Mountain. And we've done the kind of weed control that is necessary to protect native plants from invasive weeds in natural and restored areas, and on agriculture and roadside properties. One significant project has been the removal of thousands of invasive Russian olives in riparian areas to allow native vegetation a better chance to thrive. We've also supported wildlife concerns through our partnership with local wildlife rehabilitation centers. We've had a 25-year partnership with the Birds of Prey Foundation. We treasure that work that we've done with this group and with the late Sigrid Ublacher, the center's tireless founder and director for many of those years. We have provided Birds of Prey with its home south of Lafayette, and we celebrate with this organization on the release of a significant number of the 11,000 raptors that have come through their doors since 1984. Similarly, we found a home for the Greenwood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center on a property east of Lyons. They care for abandoned and injured wildlife other than raptors. Another part of our mission is to provide ways for the public to use the land for passive recreation. We involve the public in developing management plans for our properties to help determine where facilities should be located. After the plan has been through thorough public process and adopted by the county commissioners, we construct facilities for public use. We've built multi-use trails for hikers, bikers, and equestrians, along with amenities like picnic shelters and restrooms. We've designed interpretive signs that explain the historical and environmental features of our lands. We have wildlife blinds and fishing piers at many of our lakes and reservoirs, including Little Gaynor Lake near Longmont, Pella Crossing near Hygiene, Walden Ponds near Gun Barrel, and Loggerman Reservoir near Niwot. Here are some of the statistics about what's been built over the years. 104.5 miles of trails, 32 bridges on trails, 32 parking lots, 804 parking spaces, 110 picnic tables, 14 picnic shelters, 19 grills, 66 park benches, 20 restrooms, 20 kiosks, and 9 mini kiosks, 70 garbage cans, 24 bike racks, and 11 horse hitching rails, as well as other amenities. One of the reasons we have all these great trails and facilities is that thousands of people have volunteered to help and maintain them. We have wonderful partners in the community whose stewardship ethic means both enjoying our recreation facilities and doing the physical work necessary to make them happen. And there's still much more to do. We have a list of projects for years to come that will add additional facilities on other lands. Trails on open space, regional trails, and trails that connect communities and neighborhoods are desired. We're constantly working on management plans for properties that give us some sense of where additional facilities should be located. Here's a map that shows some future projects in every quadrant of the county, including the St. Vrain Trail, Steamboat Mountain, Rabbit Mountain, Kenosha Ponds, Walden Ponds, Rock Creek Coal Creek Trail, the Colton Trail, Walker Ranch, Reynolds Ranch, Caribou Ranch, and the Gold Hill area trails. Another important part of our stewardship ethic is the preservation of farms and ranches. We're working to preserve the land and the rural lifestyle that farmers and ranchers enjoy. More than 80 local farmers lease our land to grow food and feed crops, wheat, cattle, vegetables, sunflowers, honey, barley, hay, pigs, sugar beets, sheep, pumpkins, buffalo, and fruit are among the products produced on open space land. About 25,000 acres of land are leased to local family farmers, and additional thousands of acres are cared for by private owners on conservation easement land. We use the revenue from the leases to make improvements to the farms and ranches, improving irrigation ditches and installing center pivot sprinklers, building hay sheds and grain bins, repairing fences, and investing in other things that keep the farms productive. Our department is committed to using open space land to produce more local food. We lease small parcels to individuals who want to grow food for local sale. We also work with the Extension Service to offer training on how to farm small parcels. We've developed a growers association model that lets several small farmers pool together to lease open space land for small farm ventures. In partnership with Lafayette and Louisville, we constructed the Kerr Community Gardens at the Harney-Listoka property. We've provided land for a local restaurant that grows its own food to use in the business. We've added facilities at the Boulder County Fairgrounds for the Longmont Farmers Market and plan additional facilities in the near future. In summation of these efforts, we hope farming and ranching, both on larger and smaller properties, are here to stay. Another part of our mission involves preserving the prehistory and history of our past through the buildings, landscapes, and archaeological sites on open space. We've done our best to preserve and interpret the history lesson these sites provide, as well as be good stewards of these properties. We've recorded the pre-settlement history of various properties that contain archaeological sites, including Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm, the Saharius Thomas property south of the town of Superior, Hall Ranch, Heil Ranch, and Rabbit Mountain. The generosity of one landowner, Shorty Lohr, gave us the impetus to establish an agriculture heritage center north of Longmont. Shorty put 1/4 of the proceeds from selling his farm to us into a special fund that was dedicated to an education center. We also offer year-round programming at the Walker Ranch Homestead southwest of Boulder. Walker illustrates ranch life in the 1870s, including the use of horse-drawn equipment, blacksmithing, churning butter, and even vintage baseball. We've restored barns at Heil Ranch, Betasso Preserve, and Caribou Ranch. Our purchase of a conservation easement on the Trevarton property north of Allens Park allowed that family to restore their barn. As a result of their efforts, they received a first-place award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Barn Again program. We've restored the Goodhue Farmhouse at Rock Creek Farm and made it available to local governments and nonprofits as a meeting facility. Over the years, this property was a rest stop along a stagecoach route, a horse and cattle ranch, and a commercial dairy. It continues as a working farm today, including the popular pumpkin patch in the fall. In 1999, Rock Creek Farm was named the Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm to honor the tireless efforts of our longtime Parks and Open Space Director, the late Carolyn Holmberg. We've restored Boulder County's oldest complete farmstead complex on the Ramey property west of Hygiene, and we will one day open the site for a self-guided walking tour. We've stabilized the old ranch house at Caribou Ranch. We've rebuilt the Walker Ranch house that was destroyed by fire in 1992. In an effort to partner historic preservation with small-scale organic farming, we rehabilitated the Harney-Listoka farmhouse and garage last year for a resident farmer and began the development of a small-scale farm on the historic farm complex. And we've done a lot to preserve the mining history of Boulder County as well, through acquiring and restoring mining properties that contain buildings that are one of a kind in the county, and frequently one of a handful in the entire state. We restored the Wall Street Assay office west of Boulder and are working to find equipment to furnish the facility as it would have existed years ago. The purchase and restoration of this site was made possible by the generosity of the late D. Bailey, who sold us the property at below market price. She and her husband Jimmy mined and lived in Wall Street for most of their lives. We've worked to restore the Bluebird Bunkhouse that was occupied during the late 19th and early 20th centuries on Caribou Ranch. A portion of our public trail at Caribou is on the historic Switzerland Trail railroad bed. And with the financial assistance of the State Historical Fund, we're nearing the home stretch in stabilizing the Cardinal Mill west of Nederland, which will one day be open to the public. We are also about to begin the restoration of the Blue Jay Fluorspar mine near Jamestown. The county's latest historic mining property acquisition came early in 2009 through the purchase of the Rocky Mountain Mammoth Mine at the top of Magnolia Road. This family-operated hard rock mine contains one of the few remaining and perhaps best preserved shaft houses and miners' cabins that date to the late 19th century in the county. Sometimes when we buy a property, it comes with houses and buildings. When we aren't able to use the buildings or provide the funds necessary for their restoration, we have sold small parcels that include the farmhouse. It is then subject to requirements that the house be kept small and in keeping with its historic architecture. Here are some of those properties that are in private ownership, but with restrictions protecting the historic nature of the buildings. In similar fashion, we've conveyed farm buildings to individuals who use the buildings in their farm operation. This parcel, with the historic flag barn on Gun Barrel Hill, was sold to a private party who agreed to restore and maintain the barn and use it in his agricultural operation. And the final aspect of our mission is preserving buffers between communities. Within 1.5 miles of planning boundaries of our cities and towns, we've preserved 41,500 acres of land. That land and the buffer it provides allows communities to remain distinct and recognizable by something other than a sign on a highway saying that you're leaving one town and entering another. The effort to achieve buffers and rural preservation has been greatly enhanced by the existence of intergovernmental agreements that create a common vision among the communities about where urban growth will occur and where rural preservation will occur. This success is also due to our partnerships with the communities of Boulder County. We have purchased open space properties jointly with every city and town in the county, more than 70 properties totaling over 8,700 acres. Here's a map of the plains in Boulder County with the 1.5 mile buffer around each community. And here's that same map showing the land that has been preserved as open space in that buffer area and the land that is not protected from future urban development. The simple truth is that all land that is open today isn't protected permanently unless it is protected as open space land. The future of the lands not yet protected is uncertain in the long term and remains a high priority for our department as we move forward. We mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that our active citizenry is what got the open space program in Boulder County started, and that citizenry remains active today in the stewardship of our land. We have the Boulder County Youth Corps that provides meaningful employment to almost 200 young people each summer, most of whom work on open space projects throughout the county. We have cultural and natural history volunteers. We have volunteers who help build trails and volunteers who collect native seed to help in restoration efforts. We have businesses and organizations who have become a part of our partnership initiative. They sign up to be responsible for part of a trail or for a particular property with multiple projects throughout the year. And we have volunteers who monitor wildlife and who work on weed projects. We have park patrollers, adopt a park or trail volunteers, and volunteers who help with forestry projects. The total volunteer effort in 2009 included over 2,800 volunteers who contributed about 26,000 volunteer hours for open space. Additionally, another 1,000 volunteers contributed 36,000 hours for the CSU extension programs. You can see we're committed to continuing stewardship of the land and to continuing engagement with the people who live here. We invite you to join us in building on the efforts of those visionary citizens who created our program more than 35 years ago, and all those who have helped over the years since then. If you want to be involved, we're ready to find a meaningful place for you to help. Happy birthday, Parks and Open Space.